Alright guys, we already know about if statements, loops, doing math. Now we're going to talk about string manipulation. So what is a string? It's a series of characters. Could be no characters at all. Could be a whole bunch of characters. It could be thousands of characters long. So an example of when you might get a long string is if you made a query to the internet to download an entire web page in order to scan to pull some data out of it. Or if you loaded up an entire file in one fell swoop so that you could search it for some piece of interesting data. In this language, as opposed to others, it doesn't matter whether you use single quotes or double quotes. If you want, you can access each letter individually, starting at 0 and then 1 and then 2 and then 3. It's known as the index, or the position of it. So in this case, the letter is equal to fruit 1 means go there and pull it in. That may look like character 2, but it's actually 1 because we start counting at 0. So the expression within the square brackets is known as the index. Sometimes when I'm reading code aloud, I may say fruit index 1 rather than fruit square brackets 1. I'll probably say square brackets, but I might vary between the two. Just know that they mean the same thing. So to reinforce the idea that we start counting with 0 when looking at the index of it, it's kind of like if you lived in an apartment building, but the apartment started at 0 rather than 1. So this would be the 0th position, this would be the 1th position, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. Not only can you pull out a specific character, but with slices, which is when you specify more than one position, you can pull out several characters at a time, as long as they're contiguous, meaning all in a row. For example, if we wanted to get that character, and that character out, we'd use a syntax known as slicing that would return us only that one, and only that one. So starting at position 1 and going up to but not including position 4. And we'll hit the syntax for that later. The index has to be an int. You know, what would it mean to live in apartment 1.5? You know, only in Harry Potter would something like that work. Here it wouldn't. So that'd give us a syntax error and it wouldn't work. So if you need to process a string individually, you would need to know the length of it, for which case we would use the len function. The len function works with lists, as we've brushed up against with our for loops, and it also works with strings. And in many, many ways, a string is just a list of characters. But there's a couple of ways, a couple of things that you can do with lists that you can't do with strings. So to get the last character of our banana string, you might think that, okay, I'm going to get the length of the string and then I'm going to use that length as my index. That would get you a string index out of range. The reason why is, what is the length of banana? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you called len fruit, or whatever our string is called, it would return 6. But then if you use that 6 as your index value, it's past the end of the string. So in computerese, the index spans from 0 to n-1, where n is the length of the string. And the same is true for lists. There's a sneaky syntax for getting the last character out of it. And I bet one of your fundamentals students remembers how to get the last position of a list or a character out. Yeah, you just access -1, and it starts counting from here. -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, error. So, if you ever need the last character, or you know its position based on the end of the string rather than the end, you can use negative numbers. Or you can use positive numbers. You get the length of the string and you subtract 1 from that length, and boom, you can get A. So, traversing the string with a loop. Just like it's a list, you can go through a string with a loop. Syntax is slightly different though. We were using that for variable in range or for variable in list. We can't really do that. Kind of. But what we're really doing is we're just going to use a counter. Counter is how you do it. So here this loop shows how to get every character out of our fruit string. We set our counter equal to 0, and then as long as the index is less than n, the n being the length of the fruit, then letter is equal to the fruit at that index, print it out, and then add one to the index. And we could use a range statement here. For index in range, length of fruit. And it would still count 0 up to 5 in that case. But it's not quite as easy as it was when we were stepping through the list. So I'm going to pop open Notepad and just, or maybe idle, so that we can differentiate between the two tactics. So I'm going to name this one September 21. All right, so here's what we were able to do last time. Let's declare list animals is equal to dog, cat, mouse, pig. Then if we wanted to print those out, we had several ways of doing it. But the easiest was to use a for list loop. For s in list, print s. That would print them out one per line. Dog, cat, mouse, and pig. Or we could get the length of the list and use a while or a for range list in order to get through it. Here's what it would look like as a while loop. Let's use I as our index counter. We have to initialize it. Then we have to go while I is less than the length of the animals list. Print out that list element. Animals at index I. Animals square bracket I. Or we could do the same thing. Whoops, I forgot something. I always do this. What I forget? It would just print dog infinitely. And why would that be? Yeah, I never incremented I. So I plus equals 1. The reason I always forget to do that is because I prefer for loops. So for I in range of the length of the animals list. And if I wanted to, I could specify the starting position, but if you don't specify a starting position, it assumes 0 anyways. So I'm just going to leave that out. But the same deal. Our counter is I. We just don't have to declare it beforehand or increment it afterwards. So we had 3 ways of printing out the animals list at this point. This method doesn't work with strings, but the other two do. Yeah, animus. Sounds like a Harry Potter spell. Alrighty, here we go. And just to test it out, there we go. We get our list printed out 3 times. So you can use loops anytime you need to iterate through a series of values, or anytime you're going to do some repetitive task. I believe in our turtle code, the really short one that was in the homework, we just drew 4 lines. I think that we went forward 100 or whatever. We turned 90 degrees. We went forward 100, turned 90 degrees. But that was repetitive, right? What if the figure had 20 sides? You know, what if it was, you know, shaped like that? I wouldn't want to have to copy and paste 20 right turns and 20 forwards when I could just automate it with a loop. So if we wanted to do a string and print it out, like I said, we would not be able to use this mode, but we could use either the while loop or for the index in range style loop. So let's make a string. Name is equal to, and just put any name you feel like it. Abe Lincoln. Now use this same exact syntax here. You could even copy and paste it and just change animals to name. And do the same thing with the for loop. You could just copy and paste it and change animals to name. And it should work that way. Give you a moment to do that. Alrighty. I need a while loop, and I need to iterate an index counter. I is my favorite index counter. I for index. While I is less than the length of the name string, print out the letter at position I, so name index I. Instead of the words index, I may slip up and use the word subscript because some texts call that a subscript. Name subscript I. I'll try to stick with index or square braces as my terminology. And then I plus equals 1. That would work. Also, the for I in range would work. For I in range of the length of the name list, print out the name list at index I. So hopefully it'll print out the letters inside of Abe Lincoln twice, as long as I don't have a syntax error or anything. Yep, Abe Lincoln, Abe Lincoln. Space does count as a character.
Mine printed that, but I didn't see the first Abe. I just got Lincoln, Abe Lincoln on my output.
That'd be odd. Let me come look. So that was malfunctioning because I forgot to reset I. So it just started counting at whatever position we were at before. So when I ran it, it had stopped at 4, I think, and so it skipped printing out Abe and it just printed Lincoln. So I do need the I is equal to 0 there. I don't need that in the for loop because the range statement automatically defaults to starting at 0 and then going out to the end. So that's known as traversing the loop. This is a weird way to put it. I'm not quite parsing what I'm reading here. The loop condition is index. I guess they're trying to say less than or equal. That's a weird way to say less than or equal. And it wouldn't even work if you said equal. That slash just has to be wrong. That can't be right. As long as index is less than the length of the fruit, it'll work. So, write a loop that starts at the last character of the string and works its way to the first character. So it's going to be another while loop. And then prints out each letter. So let's print out Abe Lincoln backwards. And I'm not going to immediately give you all the solution because I want you to do it. But I do know a couple things about it. I know that I'm going to have to initialize my counter to something, right? I guess I could start, you know, where it ended, but that wouldn't work. It'd be past the end of the loop. So I have to initialize, and then I need some kind of while, but the while's going to be a little bit different so that we can count backwards. And then I'm going to need my print. I can pretty much fill that in. It is still going to be print name at I. And instead of incrementing I should decrement it because I'm starting at the end and going to the beginning. I minus equals 1. So I'm going to decrement. All right, I've given you half the solution here. I gave you the easy parts. You have to do these parts. Initialize I to a valid value that won't give a index out of bounds error. And then you have to write your while loop so that it doesn't go out to the length, it doesn't do less than the length. It's going to be greater than a certain value. This is what we had to do. Now this isn't the correct answer, but we're getting in the right ballpark. We're starting I at a big position because we're going to count backwards. So we set it equal to the length of the name. And then we wrote our while loop while I is less than 0 because we're wanting to go from the end to the beginning. When I run it, not going to work. We get a string index out of range. And why is that? If the name is equal to Fred, you don't have to type that. It'll work with a Lincoln. But if the name was equal to Fred, what is length name going to return? It's going to return 4. And is 4 a valid index position?
No.
No, we have to subtract 1 from it. 3 is the last index position.
Length of the name minus 1.
Yep, so length of the name minus 1. We could also try to do some trickery where we started at -1 and went out, but
Would you bet to just set your I at -1?
yeah, and then keep subtracting until we hit another number.
Like I got mine to run, but I didn't do mine like here.
Yeah, there's always more than one way of doing it. And we could have started at -1 and kept going further and further back. I'm not going to show a way to do that, but that is very true. Okay, so now I'm not going to get an index out of bounds error, but it's still not going to behave quite right.
Because you need to go to exit what I is greater than -1.
Yeah, I wanted it to say Fred, but I only got the last 3 letters. So I could rewrite my while so that it was I greater than -1 or I is greater than or equal to 0. And that would be my personal preference that way.
That makes sense.
All right, I do want to try doing it your way just to see if I can do that.
Didn't you say how to do it?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to start I at 1.
I set mine at -1.
Yeah, right. And then I'm going to do while I is less than the length of the name. And guys, I don't recommend that you do this. We're kind of using a different tactic here. Print out -1 times I. Or 0 minus I. Should have been square braces. And then I minus equals 1. I bet that'll work, and it's pretty similar to what you did. I just multiplied it by -1 to pull it off, or not.
I am which list? You just put it
Oh, I did print without actually specifying the list. That was an act of genius. Here we go. Parentheses, name, square brackets, 0 minus I in square brackets in 0. So why did that work? What I was doing is I started out at 1 and I counted up to the length. This is still a mistake. I should make it I is less than or equal to in this case. I'm going to very quickly delete this. Your way is totally valid. Give me your syntax for it.
What?
Yeah.
I equals less than length, parentheses name, print name.
So wait, while I is what?
While I is less than
Right.
length name, and then print name, square brackets I minus equals 1.
Okay, there's something I'm wondering how this works, and I'll tell you what it is as soon as I type it. Did you get that?
No.
Did I type something wrong? It would work if I did something like 0 minus the length of the name. Did I get us in the close?
It's identical, but
Yeah.
mine ran.
Yeah, I did the exact same thing.
I wonder how yours ran. Okay, anyways, we can start at -1 and keep going to the end of it.
I just figured you'd start -1 and just count back.
Right, but that wouldn't hit a good starting point because I would be less than the length of the name for a long, long time. -2, -3, -4, -5, you know, it'd just keep going. So I don't know how yours wound up
I was
working.
using Atom though, I'm not using
Oh, all right.
You did type in?
Atom.
Interesting. Interesting that it worked. Okay. So you could get that to work. Again, I'm going to delete it. This would be my preferred approach right here. Start at the length.
So if it'll run in this and it won't run in that, that's an issue, right?
I don't know what Atom is doing that's different actually there. I don't know if it's just stopping because it hit the out of bounds error, but isn't telling you why it stopped. Put a print statement after your loop and see if it ever prints. I gotta see this.
I was gonna say I did one a little different. I just used 2 counters instead of just I.
Oh yeah?
So
I want to see yours. Just that one. The other way. We gotta have lots of ways. Set the index at -1 and then initialize a counter equal to 0. And we'll base our while loop on our counter, but we're actually keeping track of 2 counters. It's just that one's going to go negative, one's going to go positive. So while the counter is less than the length of the name, print out name at position I, subtract 1 from I minus equals 1, add 1 to the counter. That's not a bad way of doing it at all. I kind of like that one because it follows the exact syntax there and there. And you could also use a for loop to accomplish that just as well. So let's do that. Still need to set I equal to -1 so that we can start counting backwards. But then for counter in range up to the length of the name, print out the name at position I, and then subtract 1 from I. 1 minus equals 1. And we don't need to touch the counter because it's being auto incremented. That's what's cool about for loops. Okay, cool. I bet they offered a solution too, so I'm interested to scroll down and see which of these mini tactics they did. I guess I should run, make sure we aren't engineering a great kablooey. All right, we did get Fred at the end a couple of times. Okay, cool. So what'd we do? What'd we do? Oh, they didn't give us the answer. All right. Okay, I was totally wrong. I said that you couldn't do it like that, and here it is, bigger in life. I apologize for lying to you. So we can do all 3 methods with either a list or a string. So this syntax is just like our syntax was our very first way of traversing the animals list. We did for variable in list, print out that variable. Now we're going to come down and print Fred out the same way, or whatever name you set. for variable, just a sec, in name colon print out that character, and that will do it one by one. I don't know why I forgot that that's feasible. Yeah.
So whenever I ran his, it like repeated the letter over and over.
Oh, okay.
But
What's your I increment?
-1.
Yeah, just set an increment for the I.
Yeah, you got to increment both I and the counter.
-1 and 0. Right?
Yeah, that's how you the initials.
Right.
And then in your loop, you increase the count.
Now that we've covered 20 different ways of doing these things, please remember this. I'm going to go back and put comments on it. Here's one way of traversing the name list. Remember me. Here's another way of traversing the name list. Remember me number 2. And I'm going to move these down to the bottom so that they're all in a row. And the third way, right here, which I'm going to actually leave as the first way, because it's the easiest syntax of all. Remember me. Do you have to cut and paste yours to match my order? Not necessarily. But all three of these are the same thing. The only difference is that if you use a for variable in list, I do not think that you can change the value of that character and have it stick. And what do I mean by that? If I stick this in here, CH is equal to question mark, and I'm hoping that it's going to change all the letters to question marks in my name, I should be sadly disappointed. Why? Because CH is a copy of the letter. It's not the original letter. On the other hand, name subscript I is the original letter. Does that make sense? Here we actually have a pointer into the list. It's like if you have a whole bunch of pieces of paper. It actually is the piece of paper. But this is just a photocopy of the paper. So if you write on the page or erase it or throw it away, it doesn't matter. So that's our photocopy machine. I know that's a stupid simile. Just know that if you actually want to change the data in a list, you can't use the for variable in list syntax. You either have to use a while loop or a for in range list. And I think that's important enough that I'm going to put a comment about it. If you need to change the data in a list, you can't use the for variable in list syntax. You must use an index-based solution, the while or the for variable in range syntax. So string slices. A slice is when you use a colon inside your square brackets, your braces. So if we wanted the word Monty out of the whole string Monty Python, we would use a slice. And we'd say, okay guys, start at 0 and go up to but not including that number. Just like the range statement, you know, if you want to count to 13, you had to put 14 as the second number in the range or the last number in the range. So that is indeed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it stops before it gets to 5. So that's what's known as slicing. And if you put a 1 there instead, it'd do ONTY. So when we do 612, it means start at index position 6 and go up to but not including position 12. So that's position 6. I didn't count it out, but I guess I could. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and it stopped at 11.
Is it treating that string as a list like it was before?
Right, it returns a new string or a new list. We had a list of animals up there. Now let's just manipulate the string. But anyways, so I'm going to give myself a long name again. Abe Lincoln again. Fred's just not long enough for us to be happy with. So if I print the name starting at position 0 and going up to 3, that's going to give me ABE. And if we count them out, that's position 0, 1, and 2. The way I think of it, because usually what people do is they want to specify the stopping position, right? If you wanted to go all the way up to L, they'd go, okay, that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so they'd want to put a 4 there. But that wouldn't get the L. So what I do is, where do I start? And then I think, how many characters do I want, and add that on to where I started. So if I want the first 3 letters of Lincoln, I figure out where I want to start. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's position 4. Into is equal to name starting at position 4, and I want 3 characters, so 4 plus 3 is 7. Then if I print into, hopefully it'll say LIN. Yeah. You're going to have to just burn it in your brain somehow that it stops before it hits that number. If it ever equals or exceeds that number, it stops. Doesn't include it. Doesn't go in the loop or whatever. Just like the range. Now the syntax is kind of funny because if you leave off the first number, it assumes 0. So if we wanted ABE, we could do this. Into is equal to name, and it just type like that. Now in my mind, is that such a huge savings? Wow, I got to skip typing a 0. Nah, it's not a huge savings. But you can do the same thing and it'll mean go out to the end. And that is kind of a neat savings because I don't have to calculate that position. Okay, I'm curious now. Can I start at 4 and then say -1 and have it get just Lincoln? And I believe the answer is a serious no. But name starting at 4 and then going out to -1, that should not work. And I believe I'm going to be proven correct on that. Or not. So what? What if I made that 0? What if I made it -2? Well, what do you know? I'm going to have to wrap my brain around it. Don't do it that way. If you want to go out to the end, just leave off the second number. So, leave off the number. I guess I better put that on its own line. Leave out the number before the colon. It assumes 0. Leave out the number after the colon. It goes to the end of the line. In other words, it substitutes LEN parentheses variable name for that to get it to work. So, if we say I want fruit, :3, it's going to start at 0, and it's going to give us 0, 1, and 2, so it's going to print out ban. If we say 3 : then it's going to start at the third position, 0, 1, 2, 3, so that's the A, and it's going to go out to the end. To the end, not the end. And so it's going to print Anna. What will this do? into is equal to name, colon, like that. Is it going to be nothing, or is it going to be the entire list? The entire string? Well, think it through. If you leave out the first number, what does it assume? It assumes 0. And if you leave off the last number, it assumes the length of the name. So it's going to be equal to the whole thing.
There'd be a reason you'd ever want to do that.
Not for strings. However, for lists, yeah. That's a really handy way of copying the entire list from one list to another. Because if you just do this, we're kind of veering off and talking about lists again, but if I do this, L is equal to animals, L is now pointing to the animals list. It's not a copy of it. So any changes I make to L, like if I do this, L subscript 0, I think it was a cat or a dog or whatever, I'm going to make it a lion. And now if I print out the animals list, it should say lion at the first. So we have two pointers, two references to the same list. But on the other hand, if we said L is equal to animals colon, and then we change the first element of L, then the animals list will have been preserved. It will not have changed it. Does that make sense?
So you can have two separate lists.
Two separate lists, right. Right. So if you ever need to monkey with a list, but you wish you'd preserved an original copy of it, then you do that. With strings, it doesn't matter. Strings are known as immutable objects. You can't change the data in the middle of them anyway, so it doesn't matter whether you have the original or two references to the same one or not. So, L equals animals, the whole slice makes a copy of the animals list so that even if we change something in the L list, when we print out animals, it prints out our original. And I guess we didn't specify it, but that's how you change an element of a list. Will that work? The answer is no. With our name, instead of Abe Lincoln or Fred or whatever we've set it at, can we change the first character to a question mark? This would work just fine in the C programming language. Instead, it blows up. Because as I said, strings are immutable. They cannot be mutated. They cannot be changed in this language. So if you actually want to change a string, you're going to have to build a new one. What do you know? Strings are immutable. It is tempting to use the operator on the left side of the assignment with the intention of changing the character. So if we want to say this, we no longer want it to say hello world, we want to say Jello world. That's not going to work. The object in this case is a string. The item is the one that you tried to assign, so we get string object does not support item assignment. For now, the object is the same thing as a value, but we'll refine that definition later. And an item is one of the values in the sequence. Doesn't work because strings are immutable. You can't change an existing string. The best thing you can do is create a new string that's a variant on it. So if you wanted it to say Jello world instead, you could build a new word starting at the second character in the string and then add a J to the beginning of it. And again, there's more than one way of doing that. But that would do it. That would make it say Jello world. Looping and counting. We can count the number of a specific character in the list. I think we did something like that where we counted the number of even numbers in a list. I may be getting this confused with where we got in fundamentals, especially since we haven't talked about lists that much yet. Let's say we have a string. Password is equal to, this is my awesome password. And for some reason, we wanted to know how many S's were in it. Well, there's a sneaky way of doing it. There's a method called, a function called count. You can say, okay, go and count the number of S's. But we are awesome programmers. We're going to count them ourselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a variable equal to 0, and then I'm going to use one of my loops to go through and inspect every letter in it. Now we determined that the simplest one was the for ch in item syntax. Check that letter. If the ch is equal to an s, then add one to our counter. Thank you. Which one am I going to change? I'm going to change that one. Ought to be the same. Now I'm going to print that out. S's found equals followed by my count. What do you know? Oh, I never fixed my earlier syntax there. I have to get rid of that line where I was trying to change the first letter to a question mark. Alrighty, so I found 5 S's in my string. I could count them, but I'm sure that's right. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Whenever we start talking about strings, typically the next assignment is a password verifier. Make sure you have at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one special symbol, one digit, and no spaces, that kind of thing. Maybe we will. I know that we already did that in fundamentals, and you'd be tempted just to go and find that program and submit it again. So maybe we'll think of a variation to do there. You could use the same idea to just find the first one. What if I wanted to find the position of the first S? I could do that, but then I would just need to break at that point. I wouldn't want to keep going. And I would need an index value. So this loop would not be appropriate to returning the position of the first S, because I don't have an index value. I don't know where this S is. I just know that it is an S. So let's label these things. This is a counting loop, and this is a search loop. So we need a variable that's going to indicate where the character was found. Based on that, can you think of a variable name? Found sounds good. Yeah, or, okay, here's a silly one. Found at index position. Nah, bit much. But I don't want to set it to anything valid yet. Because what if we don't find it at all? If we don't find it at all, I'd like to be able to check that variable, and if it wasn't a valid value, if it was still equal to -1 on the way when the loop was done, then I know I never found it.
Return that it doesn't exist or
Right. And so a lot of search algorithms, a lot of search methods will return a positive value if it finds it, or a negative value if it doesn't. Okay, so we're going to need a counter this time, or we're going to at least need a index value. We could use a for range, or we could use a while loop. Since the for range syntax is simpler, I'm going to do that. For I in range, up to the length of the password, Why can I get away with just saying range password rather than range password -1? Oh, that's wrong though. What did I do wrong there? I need a length. I need a number there. Length of password. Okay. So, why can I get away with doing that when everywhere else we... No, that's not true. Forget it. Anyways, the reason why is because this stops before it hits that value. So if the length of the password is 10 characters, this will start at 0 and go up to 9. Perfect for our loops. So if our character, if password index I is equal to our target character, in this case an S, then we're going to set found equal to that index, and then we want to break. Why do we want to break? Because if we kept going on, we'd find the position of the last S. Maybe we want that, but this is going to find the position of the first S. So by the time we get here, found will equal the index position of the first S in the string, or -1 if not found. And let's prove that. Print first S in password found at index, comma, found. And it found it at position 3. I should have printed the password out because it's hard to validate that, but if I scroll back up, I'll bring it back down. 0, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it found the first S. If we wanted it to find the last S instead, we'd just take that break off so it'd keep going. And each time it matched the S, we'd update our variable that was keeping track of our index. Now these are incredibly common approaches. Starting at the beginning of something and then going to the end, and if something matches, doing something. And if you go to a 4-year university course and you take a class called algorithms or something like that, then these will be the first ones that you memorize. So they're the first one we memorize here. If you look, there's a Dropbox size, so you can just put the September 21 script right in there. I don't know why I made it due on the 28th. Typically putting the date 3 days past the date of the lecture to give the online students the feeling that they're not behind just because they watched the lecture a day or two late. Let's see if there's any notices I need to mention. No, apparently not. Alrighty, so midterm coming up, not next week, but the week after that. And so the exam will cover pretty much everything that we hit, like maybe up till Tuesday. And then we'll do a short review on it. Of course, we're going to keep going, but that material probably won't wind up on the first exam. I don't think it's too cool to give you material on Tuesday and then make you take a midterm exam on Thursday over that material. So we're going to cut the line a little bit early.